Hello everyone, welcome back to some Radiant Dawn, Ignorant Dawn unit analyses. Last time in part 1, we did most of the Dawn Brigade, most of the what people know as the Dawn Brigade, Mekkah up until Meg. And today we're going to get started with Zihark, etc. There will be no gameplay here, just very deep interactive dialogue between me and Raisins about how good these units are. Speaking of who, hello Raisins, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, thank you very much. I didn't know if this video was just going to be like literally released part 1, part 2, or just lumped in. So we'll see whether or not this ends up in the final cut, or whether or not you're halfway through a video and you're suddenly hearing my voice welcoming you back. But
yeah.
Glad to see all you guys.
I mean, I saw that last recording, it was 1 hour, 12 minutes. I'm like, alright, that's one video, and today's another video. Let's milk that content.
There we go, yes. For what it's worth.
I know you're all doing this to like help you fall asleep or whatever. It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
Anyhow, today we have a very interesting batch of units starting with Zihark, because this is my first time using Zihark, I think in a hard mode playthrough, like actually using him long term. I've never really had much experience using him. Usually I used him as like a pre-promoted flunky that I would bench / just stop using at some point. And because at base he's very powerful, but obviously as the game goes on, the enemies kind of catch up to him, his stats. Like the enemies in part 3 do way more damage to Zihark than the enemies in part 1, and the part 1 enemies are almost guaranteed to die in 1 round, even if they usually survive 2 hits from him, whereas in part 3 and part 4 is no longer a guarantee. That's what Easy Pre-Promote for, but Easy Pre-Promote you can train, and with actually good long-term prospects. The fact that you can equip Paragon in part 1, or any other skill that you want that isn't normally available for tier 1 units, like, I don't know, Resolve. The fact that he has innate Adept as well, that doesn't cost him any capacity as long as you never take it off of him. The fact that he has an Earth support, in my case with Voluk, but it can also be with Nolan or Fiona if you want to.
Yes.
Those are all options for him that make him a lot better, not just compared to Edward, but compared to a lot of units that you could theoretically use long term. And then you also get a bunch of good swords in this. Like you get the Killing Edge he comes with, you get the Brave Sword, there's a couple Wind Edges you can buy, you can forge him a sword like I did, like the Magnificent, and just overall he has a lot of options to keep him good. Now offensively I think Zihark is, I don't want to say flawless, but it's pretty goddamn good because of those things. Wind Edges have a bit of an issue where they're like less accurate than like Javelins I think, and you can't forge them, so the 2 range is a bit limited, but generally offensively speaking Zihark is perfectly fine. Usually I have some problems with his defensive potential. Just like Edward, he kind of suffers from success sometimes, I think, if you expose him too much. That doesn't happen too much in part 1, because he still outlevels the enemies by a lot, but I find, or at least I've read about him, I should say, because I don't have a whole lot of experience using Zihark, but I feel like the problem with Zihark comes like part 3. I think it takes quite a bit of like stat boosting alone just to make him survive something like a tiger plus a cat, let alone 2 tigers. Maybe even 3 cats can kill him in part 3. I think that might be a problem for him, and that might end up, spelling his demise once we get there. I'm hoping that he can dodge enough to get by. I did give him an Angelic Robe and a Draco Shield for me, and I also plan on just having Voluk nearby for the Earth support. I plan on putting him in terrain, making a choke point. But in the end, if Zihark decides to crit 5 enemies and then they can all, and he keeps freeing up the space in front of him, I think it could die, and that'd be really bad. And I think that's just the main weakness of Myrmidon's Swordmasters, to set that whole line in this game, specifically the Dawn Brigade, who have no leadership advantage over the enemies in part 3, and even a disadvantage in 3.13. That's, I think, the main weakness for Zihark. I don't know how this is going to work out in practice. I think one thing that might come up at some point, and this is the last tangent I'll go on to, is Zihark's biorhythm is very strange. Alright, it's very straightforward. He just spends a lot of turns at the bottom and a lot of turns at the top, which I think is a difference of 5 or 10 hits for him and the enemy at some points. And if he's in worst for a long while, that could be very bad for him. I didn't keep track of where he's going to be when part 3 rolls around, but I know that can be a factor. I am not allowed to check this during the playthrough either, because this is ignorant. And sorry, last tangent on Zihark. Last tangent, yeah. I promise I'll leave something on the table for you, Raisins. The last problem I think for him is that I'm playing on ignorant, and I can't really make a calculated risk with Zihark. I can't be like, what, these enemies only have 10 hit and do like 20 damage to him when he has 41 HP or whatever, so chances that he'll die are pretty low. My best guess is going to be, well, I see a cat and a tiger. I don't know how many hits it takes for him to die, and I don't know what his chances are, so do I risk it or do I not risk it? And with Zihark being one of the few units I invested in, it's going to often have to be, I'm going to risk it and I hope it works out, which doesn't, sound super great to me. So I'm a little scared, but I'm also very excited because he's going to have to dodge, and dodge tanking at the very least is exhilarating. So I'm looking forward to it, but I'm a little tense. That's what I'm feeling about Zihark right now.
Well, I think it's like the correct way to do, because I mean, imagine if you invested that much into this unit and then you were just wary to use him, right? I feel like that seems like a kind of a dubious strat, right? Like you paid for this, now use it.
I paid for this. Now there's an argument I can get behind.
So yeah, it's I do agree with you on pretty much all points. I will say, so there is kind of like a trend of using Zihark a whole lot more in hard mode, mostly among like some LTCers that I know. The primary argument is that he can do basically everything that Jill can do, except he doesn't need any of the stat boosters that people always say to load Jill up with. So they can be reallocated to the Grail Mercs, they can be reallocated to Part 4 units or Royals or whatever. It's like really important for nerds who are big into like LTCs and talk about the probability you get exactly this stat, right? It's a lot of nerd talk, but it is all true. It is all true. So one other thing about Zihark's offense is that actually a lot of his offense, especially in Part 3 and beyond, is really tied to his skills. So it's tied to his Adept, it's tied to his Astra, it's tied to his, when he turns into a True Blade, which is the promotion for Swordmaster, it's tied to his crit plus 20. Basically, you're kind of relying on him to proc something. That's how that's his nickname in my mind, is Mr. Proc something, right? Like he has to proc something in order to kill, but the odds that he does are usually pretty overwhelmingly high, especially in times when he has good biorhythm. It's like he's among one of those three things, Adept or Astra or crit plus 20, he's probably going to get something, right? So just don't worry about it. Just throw him in there. Just hope he does well. Absolutely fine. In the Dawn Brigade, or at least in Part 1 rather, his just base stats and regular weapons and maybe his forges and his Brave Sword are just more than adequate. Getting him up to level 10, I will say, is actually probably the biggest issue. Like, you do need to Paragon him. If you want to Paragon him in 1E, then things get a little bit easier. If you'd rather send it over to the Grail Mercs, then things can actually get rather dicey and rather tricky. But overall, he's an absolutely strong Part 1 unit. I just wanted to identify that some of his key weaknesses that you hadn't brought up was that it's hard to train him up for being promoted straight away in Part 3, and his offense do actually rely on like a lot of proc skills later on in Part 3. Other than that, I think your analysis is like totally correct and comprehensive.
All right. Yeah, I do think that even though he joins like a tier ahead of all the Dawn Brigade members, I think he still has a lot of trouble getting ready for promotion in Part 4. I don't know if you have experience with this, but personally, when I see this unit, I don't want to promote him at level 10. I want to keep raising his stats, which I guess all the LTC people will have to promote him in time just to keep hitting benchmarks over and over. But I think I can get away with a bit of a slower training program. Keep Paragon on him throughout Part 3. And eventually when he reaches like, I don't know, maybe level 15 or something, he's capped all his relevant stats, then I'll promote him or something. That's the plan, at least. But if I need him to go True Blade in order to survive an onslaught of enemies, that might be something else that I have to worry about. Have you ever, tried doing that in hard mode, besides like 0% growth, which is like a very different context?
Yeah, I know. I actually have. I think there was one time I did. It must have been the lowest XP deployment run where I did actually keep him really low the whole time because I wanted to keep using Zihark. And he. Oh gosh, actually.
You hoarded Zihark.
Yeah, I hoarded Zihark. I think he ended up even on like the final team in Tower, which is not a good thing, by the way.
I can think of worse, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, not a good thing as far as like Zihark's evaluation goes, because it's very hard to level him up. But let's see. Yeah, you can continue to level him up, I'm sure, and like he's competing for a lot of other late game sword masters, I guess, if that's your goal, right? Like I guess Edward's the ship has sailed at that point.
Yeah.
But usually someone like Mia or Stefan is someone else that they're gonna brought up like, well, what if you use this unit instead? I think he totally matches them, frankly speaking. Like totally matches, just as long as you give him the level ups. Yeah, his speed and skill are like slightly lower than Mia's, but I mean, they're True Blades and this Radiant Dawn, like they'll get there anyway.
Yeah, I do feel that this will be the last thing we go on to for Zihark, because we have a lot of other things to talk about. But with Zihark versus Mia specifically, that was like a big argument back on the game facts, whatever else, but Strengths Forest forums arguing things. Is Zihark versus Mia, even though they're never in the same army unless you steal Zihark from the Dawn Brigade for from the Dawn Brigade to the Grow Mercenaries. They're never in the same army until part 4. I do feel like Mia has better strength prospects because she can bex her strength up very easily and her defense as well. And then if you give her an Ike support, especially the avoid gap because of Zihark's Earth, is not even that big. So I do feel like Mia has them beat when it comes to raw stats in part 4. And whether that makes up for like the difference in their armies is a whole other story. But I don't know. I think Mia's better long term personally. But you know, you can use multiple True Blades. There's multiple good swords in this game too.
Oh yeah, true. Especially end game swords, right?
Yeah.
Like there's Vodkati and the other one.
Alondites is the other one, right? Yeah.
I think so. That's right. You did mention stealing, and I want to bring that up, but I want to bring that up after we're done with Jill.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Because a lot of the things that we talked about Zihark kind of apply to Jill, so I guess we might as well talk about her. This is not Jill as you usually see her. I think this is a rare way of using Jill in the community right now. I actually haven't seen it a whole lot, but Jill joins at level 14 as a tier 1 unit, and usually I think the way to get the most out of her is to also train her up like you would a growth unit. And I think Jill is the best growth unit in the Dawn Brigade, if we assume for a moment that Zihark is a pre-promote and not a growth unit. I know there's been a lot of debate about Zihark versus Jill in that meta shift you mentioned earlier. But generally, I think a lot of people think Jill is at least a very good unit. I do think Jill is hurt by hard mode a lot, like Edward is, because the XP gets a lot tighter. If Jill gets to level up a lot, she does come with a great power spike whenever she promotes, and she can definitely wreak a lot of havoc, again, especially in the lower difficulties, because her strength, her speed, her defense, they go out of control. And then with the stat boosters, you can patch up any defensive holes left by her low base HP of 24, and you give her an Axe Forge and maybe either Beast or Paragon, and she just kind of goes smooth sailing. Of course, the flying is very helpful there as well. The fact that she can use 1-2 range hand axes helps, but really the flying, especially in part 4, is so huge. I noticed earlier you said that people have been preferring Zihark as a part 3 carry because he can do most of the things that Jill does, which might sound a bit strange if you know their movement types, because Jill is obviously much more mobile than Zihark. But the problem for Jill is often that she doesn't have the durability to fly out further than Zihark's movement would allow him to move anyway. And since the part 3 maps for the Dawn Brigade are all effectively rout or kill a bunch of enemies, it doesn't really matter if you can go very far out if you have to kind of hold a choke point and survive for the maps. And that's really what the maps come down to. And then Jill's mobility loses a lot of value when you prefer durability more so. And Jill, I think, can have more concrete durability than Zihark sometimes, but Zihark's avoid, I think, is sufficiently higher to where that difference can be questioned. And if they both survive, but Zihark's better offense, then Zihark obviously wins out. And I think Jill can definitely fail to hit some offensive benchmarks as well. I think with the Brave Axe in part 3, there's definitely something she cannot kill. Part 1, though, I think Jill is just very nice to use. Even as a growth unit, even as a unit that you're trying to train, because it's so easier to fly in and out with a unit that flies and has Canto, maybe some 1-2 range, but even just the Wi-Fi axe, the forge that we made to initially help Nolan, helps her get kills very easily without worrying too much about her safety, because she has enough durability to take like 1 or 2 hits, and as long as she's out of range of a Thunder Mage or whatever, and then it's easy to put her in a position where she's hiding behind someone stronger than her. But she's definitely a growth project in that way. The way I used her was very different. I just promoted her with a Master Seal in her joining chapter, basically transfers Jill at home. Yeah. And I mean, that made her a lot better at base. Obviously, it completely wrecks her long-term potential. She kind of switched roles with Zihark in that way, where now she was a unit that can help set up kills for others and be a bit more beefy, a little bit faster, a little bit better at like one-running Pegasus Knights and stuff. But it comes at the cost of her long-term viability, so this Jill is probably going to get benched at some point. But in part 3, I'm sure she'll be helpful just for rescuing, dropping, maybe holding a choke point somewhere, maybe giving a thunder support somewhere. But that Jill that you usually see in part 4 in my playthroughs, because I always use Jill, that one that like goes into part 4 with a convoy with like 5 hand axes, 2 of them forged, and just kills like an entire section of the map. That probably won't happen to play-through, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want to do the early promotion, is because I like to change my playthroughs up every time I play the game. I want to do things a little bit differently, and this is a way that I'm, even as someone who enjoys like a Jill carry, like investing all the things into Joy and into Jill and using her a lot, it's still refreshing to play her that way. Even though it's the same unit, it's still like very, very cool for me personally to do this. And I also enjoy the fact that I forged an Iron Lance for Iran just so he could be more reliable at finishing enemies off that I needed him to do, and then I just give his weapon to Jill. Be like, okay, you're already promoted now. You can use lances. Here's a forged, I think there's an Iron Lance or Steel Lance or whatever, and just go ahead and poke things with this. Yeah. So have this unlucky lib, and there you go. Now you're pre-promotes. Congrats, Jill. So yeah, I do enjoy this way of using Jill, but I do kind of miss the massive powerhouse that is part 4 Jill already. So a little bit of joy and sadness at the same time. What about you? What's left?
So I will say, anyone who's like casting doubt on the whole pre-promote Jill idea that we have now and saying like, oh, that can't be the right way to do it. I'll say that on pretty much any difficulty other than like hard no transfers, or rather like hard no transfers for Jill, like was what we're playing. Jill is just far and away, like, forget all this Zihark nonsense we said earlier, right? Like, Jill is far and away the better investment target because it's easier for her to get XP, and pretty much like any transfer that you give her is going to massively improve her performance. Even if you don't need the whole like speed run file where you're even getting magic and res, right? Like you can you could just have like 1 stat or 2 stats, and that's probably going to be more than enough to turn her into basically a completely different unit in this game, right? Any stat booster you can give her is going to be massive, and so the common knowledge is that you just give her all of the stat boosters. And again, if what you're playing on is hard transfers or anything on normal or anything on easy, yes, absolutely, just giving her, just loading her up with stat boosters and turning her into your next carry unit is like far and away the most efficient, the most efficient way to get through your Dawn Brigade maps hassle-free. Speaking of the Dawn Brigade maps, I will say you did mention Kanto. I think Kanto's incredible for pretty much most of the maps where she's available. 161 and 162 in particular. There's tons of places where flying in Kanto is very helpful, even at base, which is kind of why I enjoy the sort of pre-promote Jill playstyle. Because like, oh, even at base, which, I mean, her base plus promo stats are not really that good. Let's be honest.
No,
it's a bit depressing looking at them. I know you're not even going to switch back to them. It's like, please, let's get them out of our mind.
Well, these are our promoted stats, right? But yeah,
exactly. This is like base plus promo plus a little bit more, I think, too, right?
Yeah, so, only 1 level up, right? I promoted her instantly.
Yeah, only 1 level up. Any case, basically her base plus promo. These stats, frankly, are not good. They're good enough to move around and like kill the odd enemy in part 1, which is what you need her to do. They're good enough to move around and kill the odd like untransform the goose in part 2, which is what you need her to do.
Part 3, yeah.
But aside from that, or part 3, yeah, sorry. But yes, this is. It's not super impressive. Generally, like picking one of either Jill or Zihark is going to be a good sort of investment target. We've chosen Zihark, and the rest of how she performs as this kind of like base flunky unit is, what you're going to see the rest of the playthrough. I did mention that I wanted to bring up stealing.
Yes.
Over to the Grillmerks.
Yes, that thing that Sothos. No wait.
Yeah. So. I do think that generally, whichever one you chose to not invest in between Jill and Zihark is a decent target to steal over to the Grillmerks in pretty much any case. And the reason for that is that,
I think I disagree, by the way.
Really?
But please go on.
So, in general, I think the Dawn Brigade has more than enough items and more than enough stuff to get by on hard mode with kind of their stuff. They have, what is it? They have the Brave Sword. They have, they have like a bunch of stat boosters. They have the Celerity. They have a Pass. They have a Paragon even on them right now. A whole bunch of stuff that they can pass over to the Grillmerks, who have more maps and generally harder enemies to fight than the Dawn Brigade do. Like, at the end of the day, the Dawn Brigade, they have a Fog of War map with the Goose, which is pretty scary. Once you're used to it, it's totally fine. They have a big map with a bunch of enemies and a bunch of yellow units, which is pretty scary. Once you're used to it, it's fine. And so if you've kind of benchmarked it out and you're confident going into these maps, what you find is that the Dawn Brigade just has a ton of treasure that they want to pass over to the Grillmerks, and Olyana isn't enough for that role. So I pretty much always end up, and especially like buying things like a Storm Sword or not necessarily Short Axe, mostly the Storm Sword in 3-6, because you get one of those too. I almost always find that I want to pass some of them, or the Brave Bow. I keep on like finding this item. Look, the point is, I'm not going to list out all the items anymore. I'm just going to say there's a lot of good stuff to pass over. All right. So normally I end up stealing one of either Jill or Zihark. I think today, because of the way we set up our team, it's not going to be very intelligent to do so, because Zihark is so attached to Volug, and I think we still have a lot of utility that we want to get out of Jill in this playthrough in particular. But in pretty much all of my playthroughs, I end up finding like an excuse to ship one of them over, just because like they haven't been an investment target, and I've kind of allocated them to the Grail Marks ahead of time, so I'm not building up the support with anybody important. Like I'm not doing a Jill carry and then a Zihark Volug support, because like I plan to steal Zihark. So why would I have him build a support with someone important? I'm just like Volug Nola instead. But I do think like passing one of those is still like a really strong move. The Dawn Brigade just has too many strong items that could be going around to the Grail Marks, who have generally harder chapters.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple things that nag in my mind when you're making these arguments. I will not question that the Dawn Brigade can use some of the items, or that the Grail Mercenaries can use some of the items that you pick up between, I don't know, 1E and 3-7, I think is the earliest opportunity to recruit over Jill or Zihark to the Grail Mercenaries, right?
Yeah, 3-7 is usually when I do it.
The thing where it kind of falls apart for me personally, and again, I'm sure you've beaten the game doing these things, and I'm sure in some way it's convenienced you, but what sticks in my mind is, well, first of all, yeah, the Grail Mercenaries have more maps, they sure do, but like 5 or 6 of those are before 3-7, which is the first opportunity to recruit them over. And after 3-6, the Grail Mercs have a bunch of easy maps, honestly. They have like 3-7, which is just end turn 13 times if you want it to be, and then after that, you kind of get like tier 3 units, and everything just kind of falls apart for the enemy. Like they can't do shit. They get like hand axe forges and everything. What else do they even need to win there? I'm sure there's some items that can make things slightly more convenient. But when I get to that point in Radiant Dawn, what is on my mind is 3-13. I think that map is, especially in Ignorance, is very dangerous, but even for casual players, I think for 3-13, depriving yourself of a unit and maybe some items, depending on what they are, is not what you want to do. In 3-13 in particular, I like having all the units deployed because they can all block ledges. Like, even if they are not untrained, I like them to be able to block ledges. And even if I have Meg and Fiona and whoever else deployed, putting them on a ledge stops the Lagoose from going up. I haven't counted the amount of ones you need, but I usually find that I can always use one more. And if I have untrained Zihark or untrained Jill block a ledge, that means that someone else like Torneo or Soth or whoever else I have trained can do something else. And I think that's more valuable than sending an untrained unit over to the Grail Mercs, where they'll probably be pretty bad statistically, because we're talking about untrained units, right? So the unit themselves is not going to provide a whole lot to the Grail Mercs. In fact, they have more units than they want to deploy. If I'm deploying Jill over, I don't know, Oki or something, that's like crazy, right? You're not doing that. You're not bringing tier 2 Jill over an untrained Oki, even if he's like, uninvested, right?
Yeah, this Jill could be shipped now and she'd never get deployed, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly. So, and then something like, I'm sure there's items that work for the Grail Mercs to some extent, but I cannot agree to the fact that the Mercs have maps that warrant sending more stuff over. Personally, like if you could just ship the items in part 3, I think that'd be good. But I think you can get more value out of Jill or Zihark on a Dawn Brigade, even if they're untrained. I think even in 3-12, if they're just rescuing and dropping an NPC somewhere, I think that's still more useful than whatever they're doing in the Grail Mercs.
Right, and maybe my perception is clouded from some challenge run-throughs I've done, and maybe it's not reflective. I'll totally warrant that actually I think, like in this situation, again, I totally admit I think stealing one of them is
we agree
totally
with that.
Foolish move in this playthrough in particular. I guess you're right in general in that, like, especially if you're not yet confident in your ability to do 3-12 or not yet confident in your ability to do 3-13, then absolutely probably keep both of them. Whereas for me, it's kind of very easy to look ahead and see what I want to do in these maps, but that's only because I have a ton of experience playing them.
Wow, you just called me inexperienced. I can't believe it.
No.
Okay,
well, I mean,
there was actually one more thing. There was one more thing you
we're
said.
Playing ignorance.
Yeah,
we're playing ignorance, so it's different.
Yeah, leave aside the context of this playthrough. There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about. You said that the Grail Mercs have harder maps, or rather, they have more maps that are maybe harder, but they have harder enemies to fight. But I do believe, like, this is not about 3-6 anymore, because 3-6 is before you can recruit them over. But I'm pretty sure the 3-13 enemies are way more threatening than anything that Part 3 throws at the Grail Mercs, right? Like, what is stronger than a 3-13 Tiger that the Grail Mercs face, that they don't have a better tool to deal with? Because, like, the Grail Mercs also have Har if there's a stronger enemy out there. So what is this enemy that is stronger than a Dawn Brigade Tiger that we need. Like, what exactly are we bringing over to deal with that too? Like, what is going to be helped by that?
So the people who are not near Har, because Har can only be in one place, are generally more powerful.
Okay, but I also have Titania, Ulki, and Janaf, and Ike.
All of these people, but so Ike is pretty good, but giving him something like a Brave Sword, and normally I would just ship over the Brave Sword in like in the first shipment, really. So I do that. You could ship over Brave Sword, and then you can ship over Storm Sword, and then that alone makes Ike like much better. Like you're talking about Ike as a good unit. Well, how about you give him these two really good weapons? Also, shipping over a Paragon at some point makes it vastly easier to train up someone in addition to, like, I think having an extra foot unit in tier 3 in the Grail Mercs, like beyond just Har and Titania, like Har and Titania and one more, ends up being really useful a lot. And so shipping over a Paragon just to make sure that they have enough EXP in order to do that ends up being pretty helpful. We chose not to ship over the Paragon straight away.
So we're using Paragon in 3.6, then you ship it away in 3.7? Is that the idea?
That is one idea, yeah, because there's still like a lot of XP in those maps that you can use.
Okay, but that means you have to put Paragon on... Wait, no, you can't use it in 3.6 and then ship it over in 3.7, unless you're putting it on a unit that you don't care about in 3.6.
Yeah.
So we're not using Paragon in 3.6.
Correct.
And that sounds like you're just giving up on the Dawn Brigade altogether, which is a fine strategy, but it does like send back the Dawn Brigade a lot, I think.
Well, the idea is that you use Paragon to get to Master Crown range, and then you Master Crown and forget about him.
So you're getting like Zihark or Jill, whichever you don't care about, or someone else to tier 3, and then you're...
To tier 3 and fire and forget, basically, yeah.
I see. I guess if you plan it out, I can see that.
And, I mean, it's mostly those items. You can also ship over Brave Bow, and there are a few kills that are like kind of sus for Shinon. And I do think like there are still a couple... There's still a couple tricky maps. I do think 310 is still like worth investing some resources into, because there's a lot of enemies to kill in different areas, and even something like 311. Like 311 does not have trivial enemies.
311 is the bridge, right?
Yes.
I don't know. 311 is when I get people to tier 3 in Grail Mercs usually, and I just kind of laugh at all the enemies. But that's my experience, I guess. Is it possible that the Grail Mercs map are harder for you because you shipped away those resources? Is that possible?
Are they? Because I shipped the resources like to the Grail Mercs, they're harder?
No, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Never mind.
Yeah,
forgot I said that.
Say,
I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, the point is we disagree. Shall we move on to a different unit, because Jill's getting burned into my monitor right now.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about a simpler unit.
This is easier to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely easier to talk about. Not easier to train though. So Fiona has a thing in common with Zihark, and that she has Earth Affinity. That's about it. Everything else about her is different. Z has a mount, and she can technically rescue drop people, but she's very handicapped in all of the maps that she is in. Literally all of them, no matter where you put her in part 4. Let's see, she starts in 162, she doesn't join yet, she joins in 1.7. 1.7 is indoors, and it has ledges, so that cuts down our movements and cuts down our movement options. 1.8, I would say the swamp is pretty bad for her, but she's not even allowed to be deployed, so that one we skip that. 1.9 she's not in, so then she has 1E is her second map being playable, and it's indoors and it has ledges, so yay. And it has a heavy deployment slot competition. And then in part 3, 3.6 is a swamp, 3.12 has a mountain. To be fair, she can kind of move around there, so it's not that bad for her, but it does have a mountain. And then 3.13 has the ledges again. I do think some of these maps are good for her, but the terrain does not like her. And in part 4 has a bunch of terrain on every route as well, basically. And then her stats are god-awful. I've seen some theorizing about why they're this awful, because she's a level 9 last night, but she has stats on par with like units that join in 1 prologue. But it's possible they forgot to auto-level her, but that would seem really strange. The fact of the matter is, no matter what the motivation was for developers to give her these bases, they get her one-rounded by just about every enemy, I think even on normal mode, let alone on hard mode. And that means that she's relegated to either a funny unit that you train up, which is very fun, and I'm going to do it. I did it for my Iron Man, and I'm going to do it again for a draft run that I'm done doing, like a regular casual draft playthrough. But let's not pretend it's a viable strategy, that it's in any way, shape, or form some kind of optimal. It's not. It's very fun, but it's not very good. The other way to use it would be utility bots with things that you can do that her stats don't matter for, like rescue dropping, which I think has its place in some maps. She's not always optimal for deployments, but in part 1 there are a couple maps where rescue dropper is helpful, particularly 1.7. It's nice to have her there, and then 1E, I think there's usually not enough slots, but you could technically fit her in if you wanted to. And then in part 3, I really like her in 313. Occupying the ledges to stop Laguz from coming through is just super nice. And what you can do with her is pick up an NPC, put the NPCs on halt, next turn drop the NPC in a spot where they're better off. Any of the ledge spots that prevent Laguz from jumping up and mauling your units, it works. And by doing that, Fiona frees up your other units to do other things, which I think is actually very good. And because her deployment is free, no one else needs a deployment slot on that one. It's pretty good and done for free. And after that, she usually just kind of vanishes, even though part 4 is theoretically pretty open to anyone when it comes to deployment slots. But a level 9 lands, and there's no place being in part 4 anywhere. You just be the liability. So unless you trained up Fiona the funny way, she's not going to do a whole lot from there. But I do think she's an interesting unit. I don't mind it when the cast is imbalanced like this. I think it's fine to give people a training option like that. Even though some people would never touch these kind of units. Some people do enjoy that. I do occasionally enjoy that. I think it's totally fine. She's hilarious. Her stat growths are bonkers. I think her speed and luck in particular are very, very good once they level up a bit. The Earth Affinity lets her dodge a lot of things if she's just actually being deployed long term. And she also has some good caps, I think, in the end game. So there is long-time viability for Fiona. It's just behind a lot and a lot of training. But if you're into that, you know, have fun. But on tier list or anything like that, she's going to be very low. What about you? Anything to add?
Yeah. This is one of those units where whenever it's brought up, I feel the need to bring up the point that, like, aside from, I think there's like 7 units in this game where this does not apply. But everyone else will have at least one map in the game where they're either free to deploy or where they're forced deployed. And Fiona's one of them. She has 3 maps, 3.6, 3.12, and 3.13, where she's just completely free to deploy. So you might as figure out what you might as well figure out like what to do with her on those maps. And rescue dropping is still pretty good. Things like throwing javelins at untransformed Laguz, or even transform Laguz in order to de-gauge them. I've done that sometimes too. Been like, oh, you're at 4 gauge. Here you go. Here's something for Fiona to do. And both of those things are very handy. Like picking up yellow units in particular and dropping them in a more intelligent location than whenever they found to go is usually a pretty helpful thing to do that Fiona can contribute. Is it like amazing? No. Like the fact that this is the best I can speak to her, like, kind of shows she's really not that strong of a unit. If someone came up and said she's the worst unit in the game, I would not scoff at them. But in general, she's really not that powerful. Again, you could theoretically train her. It looks like pretty much any other training of a very weak unit goes. Like, you have a really hard time, and then you have a capped unit in endgame who's really cool and funny and gets you good clips on YouTube, right?
Yes.
So,
for sure. I will say from Fiona's training specifically, I think she's a little bit worse compared to, let's say, FA6 Lina or something, or take any other training unit that's like Lina. Like Nino, for example, I think is also very different, because not only are Fiona's combat stats like bad in the sense of like she does no damage and she dies to everything, but she also has bad accuracy. So if you weaken an enemy for her, you have to in some way set it up to where she has a very low chance of failure, or failure doesn't result in death, which usually means using an even worse accuracy javelin, or you do something like glare a priest with Nailah so that they stand still in place and then you grind on her. That's basically how I did it, except in part 4 in my Iron Man playthrough. Because otherwise, chances are you go through an entire chapter and your Fiona dies. And unless you're using like save states, I mean Mekkah's Turnwheels, then she's more likely to die than to get trained up. So that's an extra handicap you have to go through with Fiona.
yeah, and you could always fight at one range, but
I think if you forge an Iron Lance, it might be possible to reach 100 hits, but I have no experience with that against like part 1 enemies.
You can against some enemies. It really depends. 1E, just forget about it, bro. Just forget about it.
Yeah, but those leadership stars, they will not work in your favor.
That was such a big brain move you pulled where you're like, wait, let me kill Jared first.
Yeah, I still missed, I think. I still got hit or something. I forgot exactly what the context was. But yeah, anything left for Fiona on the table?
Nah, not to be honest, no.
Alright, we speedrun this one. Vika, we can also probably slightly brief about. Another unit that I was bribed into using for my Iron Man that I actually really enjoyed. The way I solved this one is grinding on a boss instead of a Glare Priest, but same principle. She's really cool. I learned about how her gauge is different than a lot of other Laguz. That's funny. I hope you can explain that again in a little bit. But Vika, I mean, everyone knows she suffers from availability. That's her main problem. Her stats are not unusable for part 1. They're pretty good. She does double everything, and even though her strike is a little weak. I think her beak is what? Like 7 might, locked to 1 range, all usual problems. But in part 1, you know, you're so desperate for a flyer that it's often still worth using her and giving her some grass, letting her get transformed, and then double things. But then by the time she comes back in part 4, she's so underpowered that it takes real effort to get her going. But you know, that's the type of unit, just like with Fiona, where if you're into that, you're gonna put through with it, or like I was doing in my Iron Man, you do it for financial gain. But either way is a fun experience once you get there, because she turns out hilariously fast and lucky, and she procs like tier all over the place because the end stats are so good. And I don't know, I just enjoy the Raven animation because it's so cheeky, seeing them double just about everything. And
I love the somersault they do.
Yeah, it's great. And she's not bad in part 1. I said earlier that the deployment slots are a bit of a problem. I think we deployed her in 1E, but only barely. Like, it was either her or Nolan. If I'd actually used Nolan or promoted him in some way, then she probably would have been on the bench instead. And she didn't even do that much in 1E in the first place. So with competition being so tight, I wouldn't blame anyone for undeploying Vika. But I do think she's like up there in some of the best units to deploy for 1E. And I think in 1H she's genuinely helpful with fighting enemies. I think we used her to bait like a wyvern on a swamp because our Tormod's positioning was slightly off. That kind of stuff is nice. You know, having a unit that can fly around the whole map rather than being able to move like 1 or 2 tiles at a time. That is nice. Like that is the one time that Vika is force deployed and pretty good to use. So I appreciate them doing that. And also the map where she joins, she's pretty good. You know, she joins transformed. You can at least hit enemies until she untransforms, and then she's done her free job. That's pretty decent. Unfortunately, it's the only part where she can be considered decent, but it's still free utility. That's just kind of nice. It's just, it kind of ends there, right?
You might as well use it. I will say, so in general, actually let me speak specifically about 1-8, because there's a thought about 1-8 here, and it's pretty easy to miss if you're kind of like a newer player, you're going through Radiant Dawn. How strong Vika and Muarim are in 1-8 depends a lot on whether or not you purchased that like one Olivia Grass that was in the shop.
Yeah.
Like I think there's an Olivia Grass in the shop on 1.8. It costs 1,800 gold, and it's totally worth it, guys. Just go ahead and pick it up and like spam the hell out of it. Don't worry, you'll have enough. Like this is a consumable for Lagoos where it makes gauge management considerably easier because you can use it to charge up, you can use it to stay charged, and again, like there's this kind of nagging thought in your mind that you need to conserve this, but you will generally have plenty between the one you get in 1.9, and I think there's like one you get in 3-6 as well.
Yeah.
So
real quick, I will say I've run out before and it feels very bad, but I think that was a playthrough where I didn't pick up the one in 1.9, and I might have also like missed out on a purchase somewhere along the way. But now that I've got, I think all the ones you can obtain up to the point, like that shop one, the 1E one, the 1.9 one. I think there's even a droppable one in 3.6 somewhere. I think I'm going to be good for the rest of the game. So generally, I think you're right.
Yeah, and if you're missing out on the Olivia Grass, then Vika will basically never transform in 1-8. Like, by the time she transforms, there's already like 2 wyverns and 1 civilian, right? So, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a good time. But if you're just swallowing grass every turn, you'll end up doing much better with Vika in 1-8. She actually can contribute to a lot, like taking out a lot of enemies on the southeasternmost island. She can pivot around and stay in the south if you end up needing it there. Totally a good unit during that map. In 1E, again, I think she's a fine deployment if you want to do that. Later on, I know we haven't even mentioned like what did they do after part 1. Don't worry about it.
For Vika, that slot, that little box in your form is empty. There's nothing there.
Yes. This is the start talking about Muarim box. Yeah, but.
Yeah, she can hit doors. She can rescue drop someone in and out of position. I guess that's kind of it. It's not a whole lot there. There was like one thing I wanted to mention about Vika that I just remembered is that she's untransformed. You could have her. I think the Ravens punch someone if they're untransformed, right? Or they kick them maybe. Either way, they can attack an enemy on enemy phase if they get attacked, and how much gauge they get for doing that depends on how much damage they do. I think if they do 0, they get a lot more gauge than if they actually do damage, and depending on the enemy's stats and how they roll and what terrain they're on, that can differ. But I think that is one cheeky way to get Vika transformed, and it's like the one advantage he has over Muarim, because Muarim will always damage everything because his fists can just break through steel, whereas Vika's kicks or whatever shit he does wouldn't even put a dent in a plastic bag. So that's another way you can get her transformed if you, I don't know, find yourself without Olivia Grass. Although I think the best way to do it is to Olivia Grass, put her in range of someone that she doesn't damage, punch them, and I think she's ready for transformation, right? I think that's roughly how her gauge works.
I think so. I think in order to gain the gauge, you have to miss.
Oh, I thought it was doing 0 damage, because it also works if you like 2 range or get 2 ranged.
Yeah, you have to not hit, I think, in order to gain that gauge.
Oh, so doing 0 damage doesn't matter? Like what I just said is wrong?
Yes, I think if you do no damage, then you actually don't get any bonus gauge.
Oh, I could swear it made a difference. What, am I confused with anything in particular?
I might be wrong. How about this guy's like...
Post in the comments if one of us is wrong, especially if both of us are wrong.
Yeah, someone's gonna actually get like half gauge. No.
Actually, you transform twice over. You become like a Nailah if you do that.
True, exactly. I'm pretty sure you don't though, because I've tried it before, and she still kind of runs into the gauge issue. The issue with her gauge is that she gets +6 per turn, which is like, it's not enough to Olivia Grass and then like maybe chill out and do a shove on the next turn. Like you have to double Olivia Grass. Like there's no way you're going to be able to transform fast enough otherwise. And then, of course, like she still loses gauge very quickly. So you mentioned she had unique gauge. It's like, well, yeah, it's uniquely bad is the issue.
It's like between cats and tigers in, right?
Yeah, it's between cats and tigers. Like, no, it doesn't have the advantages of either.
Fair. All right. Let's, I think you said talk about Muarim. I guess while we're on the topic of gauge, we might as well go over Muarim before we get to Tormod. They join at the same time anyway. Muarim is Vika. If Vika had good combat stats and no flying, I guess. Super strong. I think there might be some enemies that he does worse against than Nailah, like where it actually matters, but most of the time I think they're identical when transformed. Muarim kills things. I'm generally just super impressed by the fact they gave you a unit with 58 HP and 1/7. I find that very funny because it's just such an absurd number. It's like 2 away from the cap in the GBA games. But just generally speaking, he OHKOs almost everything. He doubles. I think maybe he does. There's like some Myrmidons he doesn't double, but he'll just probably just OHKO those. So if you can afford the Leafy Grass to transform Muarim, and he's deployed either in 1/7 or 1/8 where it's free, or 1E where honestly it might as well be free because he's the best target for the slot, then you should do it. You should deploy him, and he'll destroy everything just as long as you get him transformed. And doing that is fairly trivial overall. That's basically Muarim in a nutshell. Of course, he has the same availability issues as Vika and Tormod, where when he comes back, he's not that good. But I will say, if you want to use one of the Lagoo's Emancipation Alliance, that little group of 3, in Part 4 and onwards, or if you are forced to use them all, then Muarim will be the least headachy of them all, because his stats are the best. He can actually survive a couple hits. I do know that the enemies in Part 4 have enough crits to where Muarim can actually face lethal attacks if an enemy does get to hit him. I've also heard that like Resolve Muarim is I wouldn't say viable, but it's like one way to make him able to double, because the 22 speed he has after transformation is good enough for Part 1, but it's definitely not good enough for Part 4. You definitely want more. Like 22 is around what Ike has at base, so you definitely want a bit more than that. But if he does have the speed, then he should be okay. And that's Muarim.
Yeah, that's Muarim. I do want to bring out the Part 4. Like, I understand we talked about Vika, and it's like we don't want to talk about Part 4. 30 defense, 36 strength is like some decent hard stats for Part 4, all things considered. Like, you could make the argument, oh, you'll just have people who are better than that. Okay, fine enough, but like, come on, it's still pretty good. Right? Like, at the end of the day, you're still doing a lot of damage, and you're still not taking a lot of damage. You're still taking, like, several rounds of combat to kill Muarim at the end of the day. This is a base. What Mekkah said about Part 1 usage, however, again, like how to use him on 1/8, how to use him on 1/7, how to use him on 1E. Again, he just one-rounds everybody. Like, he's Nailah light. You need to worry about gauge. But just totally a worthwhile unit to deploy and use. And don't really feel bad about using him, because at the end of the day, there's probably still like only a few enemies that you're going to be killing with Muarim. So you're not stealing that much XP in the long run if you need to do it. But those maps have a lot of urgency to them, where there's guys spread out everywhere, and it's not like your hyper carry who needs every drop of EXP they can get is going to be everywhere at once. So just put Muarim where they aren't, and go ahead and just enjoy the free kills. Absolutely, totally powerhouse unit in Part 1. Part 4 comes back, has the hard stats to survive a couple times, and that's basically it. I think you pretty much summed him up.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any innate skills either, right?
I don't believe so.
Unless, nothing special.
Unless you could transfer for Smite from Path of Radiance somehow. That'd be the one thing, but that's the imagination for me. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the part where you said, like, to use him to get free kills. It's definitely insanely hard to give all the kills you want to the Dawn Brigade to every unit that wants kills at all. And most of the units in Dawn Brigade don't care that much. And a lot of them that we're deploying are either temporaries, or they're going to leave, or they're not, like, they're long-term deploys, but they don't care about their stats that much. Like someone like Fiona doesn't need XP to rescue drop people. So, and in the end, unit stats are there to make your life easier, and this guy has really good stats. So are they like, let's say you get 1 extra point of speed on Nolan by painstakingly feeding him kills. Is that really that point of speed worth more than Muarim's extra 30 HP over Nolan or whatever it is that he has?
Yeah, it's massive.
Or his 15,000 extra speed and attack and everything else. Like, just stats are there to be used. Don't steal stats from your units. Don't steal utility from other units by not using Muarim. Anyway, yes, Tormod is last. Same availability issues, same-ish utility too, where, you know, he one-rounds a lot. I used to think that Tormod, like, one-rounds everything in part 1, but I've actually been a little bit disappointed in his 1E performance in particular, where he has some accuracy issues, and he doesn't double everything. So as a result, there were some enemies that were alive after Tormod attacked, which I didn't think was, you know, that's not what pre-promotes are for, right? Pre-promotes are supposed to one-round everything. So I was a little bit surprised by that. He's still solid, but you gotta take, like, you put a little more care into Tormod. It's like Zihark, like, durability, a little less speed. But the one's range is nice because it makes positioning him so much easier. You can put him up on the ledge, and he'll just kill everything down the ledge. He can be shoved into the swamp to get to the Wyvern in 1/8 that threatens to kill one of the civilians. He's just another good help. You just need to make sure that you're actually killing the things you're attacking with Tormod. And in Ignorance, I can't do that without pressing the attack button, but you can if you're not playing Ignorance like me. So just check what he does before you assume he's going to kill something, and you'll generally just be A-okay. He doesn't have gauge to worry about, so there's almost no opportunity cost using Tormod other than, oh no, he steals a little bit of XP. But generally, Tormod is a fine pre-promote to use, and absolutely worth the slot in 1E, and absolutely worth using when he's force deployed in 1/7 and 1/8, in the same way that Vika and Muarim are. And he's very funny. Don't forget to take celerity off him before you end 1E. That's the one big tip I have for Tormod. Yes. In fact, you probably should take it off of him in 1/8 to put it on someone else. That's generally a better idea.
Straight away. Yeah, the skill's kind of good, just a little bit. But, so, I will say, one thing that does help with one-rounding things with Tormod is that he can get a Forge. He can get, usually like a Forged Thunder is what I do, because I make one for Oyana really early. That can be helpful. And, again, we're kind of playing Ignorance, so we just kind of assumed that Elfire and Fire would be adequate, rather than, you know, doing what I do and just looking up all the stats ahead of time. But in this case, like, using Elfire and Fire, it's enough for, like, enemies in 1-8, or 1-7 rather, and then all of a sudden it's not really enough anymore. Like, even the Wyverns, I think, survive Elfire. So you do need a little bit more. The accuracy kind of sucked. I was actually shocked at, like, how much he was missing in 1E. I was like, this can't be the same, but apparently it is. This is just the reality that we face with Tormod. So yeah, like, I thought these were accurate spells, but
yeah, I think looking at his hit for a moment, he has 121 with Elfire right now. If we just take Jared's leadership alone, that's 15 off of that, right? So that goes down to 106. So at that point, enemies just need some avoid to dodge, and maybe he just got really unlucky. But I think 30 avoid on an enemy is not super rare in this game. No. So maybe that's why he would dodge. It sounds kind of high, 30 avoid. It would be like 10 speed, 10 luck, right? I think enemies have luck in this game.
Enemies do have luck.
Maybe we do. Maybe we got a little bit unlucky there.
They have more speed than that even. Like, they probably...
Oh yeah, 10 speed is not a lot actually. Yeah, maybe it's more like 17 to 20 speed. Okay, that actually, yeah, that explains more, yeah.
Yeah,
so
no,
like
it's like, hold on. This is not really that good all of a sudden. But, yeah, no, he's an alright unit. He's still probably worth the deployment slot in, 1E, which is the time when you get to choose to deploy him. He's still worth it there, probably. So, go ahead and use him. I will say again about the inventory, all of his stuff gets convoyed at the end of 1E, so you don't have to worry about accidentally leaving something really strong on him. It just all gets convoyed.
Yeah, just no skills, please.
Yes, those don't. So, all
right, fair. That's Torgod. Muarim we went over, so I guess we're on to the last 4. I guess Tauroneo is at the bottom. Did we talk about Tauroneo when we had him back then in 1.6? No, right?
No, we didn't. We totally forgot.
Oh shit, we should totally do that now. He's like the one character I couldn't put in order here. Everyone else has been ordered by availability, but Tormod or Tauroneo stuck to the bottom because he's undeployable for 1.7 onwards, unfortunately. But the one chapter, that's really 2 chapters that we have him for, he is actually, it's like, I don't know if I call him the best unit in this part, but it is pretty striking that we get a unit that has both basically invincibility other than the one hammer guy and one to range. That's like pretty buff, like pretty insane to have, even if it's for 1 chapter. And it's a pretty good pair of chapters to have him in for, because there are a lot of enemies in that chapter that can really lock you down a bit. I'm specifically referring to the 1.6 Pegasus Knights and to a lesser extent the mages that can really create an awkward situation. And Tauroneo being able to just go to one corner and obliterate everything there to make your life less of a headache is super nice, especially if you're trying to raise a bunch of frail units. I chose to undeploy a lot of those units, but I remember in the past having Tauroneo there to protect them, like maybe step in their way so they don't have as much range as they normally would, or just kill them when they're there. It's absolutely fantastic to have. Resolve, I usually take off of him. He shouldn't have it anymore in the save. It's nice if he's getting attacked by the hammer guy. That saved me a game over in my Iron Man, but generally I take it off of him and give it to Mekkah so she can double, or I just leave it in the convoy because I just don't want to have it on Tauroneo. And I usually pass it to the Grimworks as well, I think. But Tauroneo himself, he's useful in part 1, then he vanishes. He just isn't allowed to be deployed because I think all of 1.7, 1.8 are basically Mekkah going rogue against the army as a whole, and Tauroneo's hands are tied. He's like, I can't join you for this one, I'm sorry. And then 1.9 Mekkah's all alone, and then 1E, for some reason, he's still not there. I forgot what the justification is, and maybe he's busy in the city or something. But he's still not there. But then finally in 3.12 is when you get him back. And he actually can take a whole ledge by himself in that chapter because of his... he's forced into a specific deployment square that no one else is. And if you want him to, he can just like throw hand axes down for like 40 turns and win the map that way. Not the fastest way to do it, for sure, but he can definitely help. And at least he helps keep like Pegasus Knights off your back and maybe weaken some enemies for other people. And then in 3.13, again, he's a great choke point holder. His bulk is good enough to take a couple hits. I think there might be some Tigers with enough attack to two-shot him. That sounds super ambitious, so don't quote me on that, but I think he's not invincible there. Like, thinking he's invincible there is a bit of a mistake, but he's one of the more durable units you have, and he can definitely take a couple hits there and, you know, stop Lagoose from filtering through into harder to choke points. And then part 4, he's kind of unremarkable from there because you have better units that either made it to tier 3 before he does or are just better in that class. But if you want to use him there to kill a couple of stray reinforcements that just ended up somewhere, he's usually up to the task. But his speed is kind of lacking at that point, so he doesn't really double anything. But he will usually survive at least, so that is nice. That is his whole career in a nutshell, and it kind of goes down as the game goes on. He goes from invincible to good to you probably have better units, but overall still very impressive resume. I think Tauroneo is very good when you have him initially, and you should always make the most of him when you have him.
I do want to highlight what you said about 3.12, where he has the unique deployment square. I like to say that he has the best movement on that map, right? I mean, he does, right? He reaches the enemies first.
Yeah, sure,
so,
sure.
There you go.
This point is yours.
Does that count? So we'll give him that. So I did want to talk about Resolve. So Resolve is a skill where when it's on, then as long as you're below half HP, you gain 50% boosted skill and speed, right? I do think that this is a skill that's probably worth taking off of Torneo. There's like one kill I know of that Torneo can do that kind of like requires Resolve.
3.13, I assume?
Yeah, it's in 3.13. Pretty much every other circumstance where you want to be using Torneo, it's either not really going to be relevant because he's never going to get that low in the first place, or in the case of like defending against Tigers in 3.13, it's actually a detriment because it can make you suffer from success. And again, he's a game over condition. And Mekkah, like you mentioned, he is absolutely not invincible. He does take damage from even cats and even from tigers. So like, it's very likely he will suffer from success if you keep Resolve on him in that circumstance.
I think that goes for Resolve as a whole for the Dawn Brigade. Yeah, it's very risky.
There are things that Resolve can let you do. Like Resolve in general can do one of two things. It can either take a unit who's not doubling and it makes them double, or it can take a unit who already has a ton of speed and it makes them dodge tank.
Yeah.
Both of those things are very valuable. It's just, you know, Tauroneo, becoming a unit who doubles is not really what he wants to be doing if you're just trying to defend on 313. Like, it's counterproductive to your game plan. So I think you shipped it over to the Grail Mercs, did you?
Yeah, I did. Because I think they can use it more safely.
Yeah, I think that's a generally very powerful plan, just shipping it over to the Grail Mercs. There is something worth mentioning, and that is specifically like Master Crown Speedwing. It does seem kind of counterintuitive to take your pre-promote and put the stat boosters on them. But Master Crown Speedwing Tauroneo is, in particular, like so much better in one map that it's actually kind of worth considering, like keeping the Speedwing here entirely. I don't think we did that. I think we shipped the Speedwing over to the Grail Mercs as well. Or
I think so. The 1E Speedwing, I didn't deploy Ileana in 1E, did I? So that Speedwing is not going to the Grail Mercs. I think that one is still on the Dawn Brigade somewhere. And
there you go.
I think you get one before that. Do you? No, right?
I think
you don't. Do you?
Wait. No, you don't. Okay.
At least I'm very sure I didn't ship one over to the Grail Mercs. At least I know they use Speedwings really well, but I generally use it on like a unit in the Dawn Brigade, I think.
There's only 3, and we found the first one. Okay, so it's in the Dawn Brigade.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a possibility. It's something that's like, it's super nitpicky, but it does make him like so much better in that particular map that I think it's worth a consideration. If you've never tried it, or if you're having difficulty with that map, you may have used the Speedwing already, unfortunately. But if you still have it lying around because you're the type to hoard stat boosters, I don't know if we have any of those in the comment section.
Damn, called out.
I know. It's worth a consideration in any case. So he's an incredibly powerful unit. He practically, on any map where he's present, he practically solves it by himself. And he's always force deployed on all of those maps. So like I think he's generally a solid unit. You should be deploying him more, or using him more when he's deployed.
Does he do? How many crowns do you get in Dawn Brigade? 1 or 2?
You get 2.
Okay.
2 out of all the 5 crowns you get in the game are in the Dawn Brigade.
Okay, so either it's worth considering for me personally, I think, because Zihark will probably want a crown. Either that or just level to 20 and then promotes, but might want a crown at some points. But then the other one, like who in the Dawn Brigade right now wants a crown, right? No one.
Yeah.
So either I wait for Grail Mercs to use it, or I use it on Tauroneo. That's the way I see it.
It's a good line of logic, I won't lie.
Okay. We done with Tauroneo?
I think we're done with Tauroneo, yeah.
All right.
We have only 3 units left.
Yes. Rafiel, I mean, 4-way dancer. We all know how powerful it is. I think Rafiel's part 1 is like a little tricky to use because both of the maps that he is in, 1-8 and 1E, make it a little tricky to use him safely. 1-8, he's kind of locked into corner, and you can get him out of there. It takes a couple turns, so a couple turns where he could have been useful. And then you still have to be very careful because Rafiel dies to a stray breeze somewhere. His speed is like basically 0. He gets doubled by everything. His defense is 3, so like it doesn't. Some enemies probably want to kill him, but if they don't, they'll just get another shot at him. That's scary. If you do get 4 units that use their turn productively, and you can fit Rafiel in the middle of that diamond and make him move again, which you can do in the first turn 1E, that alone is very, very good. That's some very solid, the very powerful utility to just be able to have Nailah, the Black Knight, Muarim, and I don't know, Jill or Zihark, whoever you're using, take another turn. Super amazing and busted. I can totally understand why you only get this for 2 maps before part 4. I get it. But it takes some protection, and after you've used it once in 1E, I find it a little harder. Like every turn where you have to really think ahead to be able to use Rafiel in consecutive turns, and I'm not really the type to think ahead while I'm playing a map because I'm already busy trying to commentate, trying to banter with Raisins, and also trying to not die with my units. So it's very hard to do that, especially in the cramped corridors of 1E. Well, with like enemies firing from above with like archers, it's a very tricky thing to do. But if you can do it more than once, it's definitely like map defining. It completely changes the way you play the game, and you'll find yourself like way many turns ahead of the reinforcements and the thieves and everything else you would be worried about normally if you can pull it off. But it's hard. Then he comes back in part 4. I think he's the best hero on there. Just turn 1 Vigor is the easiest Vigor to set up. So being able to do something like Puchin Alpha and Ulki in a diagonal, have them both use a Living Grass. Rafiel dances for them, they can use it again, and then they're ready to transform next turn. That alone is pretty good. But they can also have like Titania attack something, Canto back, Horror attack something, Canto back. Anything else like that, maybe use a Torch, maybe use a Pure Water. A lot of ways to make Rafiel's turn 1 be very helpful and also add a bunch of mobility to units. So He has some depth there in part 4. I think he's the best one to bring to end game. I've gone into that a lot of times, so the general argument is usually pretty clear. Just turn 1 Vigor is too good. But I've also enjoyed taking other Herons into end game just for funnies. I just think Rafiel is the best of them. But in part 1, he doesn't really get a chance to shine because of the issues I just mentioned. But when you have him, obviously Rafiel is very powerful.
Yeah, so the Dancers are only really as powerful as the units around them, and certainly in 1.8, there's Nailah, who's really great, but Nailah's only 1 unit, she's not 4, right? Like, that is kind of the issue with this first impression. Of course, later on, again, in 1E, you do have 4 powerful units, so this guy's kind of excellent. And then in part 4 and beyond, yes, of course, you probably have 4 more powerful units in whatever army that he's present in. Or at least you should, because you have the Rafiel dance. I could prattle on about like how important it is to have a dancer, but I think you have like an entire series about that, right? like dancers are kind of really good, guys. Being able to refresh someone is basically like having another copy of that unit on your team. And also there are some plays that are just completely unique to having a dancer. Like you could actually literally replace Rafiel with actually 4 other copies of that unit, and the plays Rafiel enables would still not be possible. Right, like you could literally just give 4 extra deployment slots with 4 extra royals, and you still wouldn't be able to do some of the like 1 turns that he's able to let you do. As far as his tankiness goes, you're kind of right. I was trying to encourage you to leave him in range a couple times, be like, hey, I bet you he is tanky enough. But you weren't having any of that. Yeah, you weren't having any of that. Just don't put him in range, guys. It's that simple. He can transform. If he does, he gets 12 magic, so now he heals 12 allies adjacent as he's full of Flora dies. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation.
I have not, but I'll keep it in mind.
I've been in this situation a couple times where it's like, oh crap, Laura's dead. Oh no, and now Raphael's my source of feeling. I probably should have just swallowed Bones, but you know, in my mind, I have to conserve those, don't you know? But in general, just you could probably ignore the fact that he transforms. I don't know anyone who...
Yeah, it did let him tank the mage. That was pretty funny. I like that.
There you go. That was funny.
That's about the extent of it, for sure. Okay, shall we move on to Nailah?
Oh, this is easy, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so everything we said about Muarim is probably true for Nailah, but she doesn't have a gauge. She's only 1/7, I guess that's one thing. She can transform and then attack right away instead of having to use a Living Grass. Like, she just gets the free turn there and then just keeps going from there. It's very powerful. We went over the utilities of Pass on Nailah in 1E. It's kind of amazing that you can put a skill like Pass on a unit that's around for 1 map, lose that skill for the rest of the game until part 4, and it's completely worth it, but that is what Nailah does. She just completely trivializes 1E by having it. Even without having it, it's still very good, but just being able to run past enemies guarding ledges is super powerful, and she kills everything, and that's pretty nice. I use her quite a bit in 1E because the units I wanted to feed XP to were basically just Zihark, and he was elsewhere, so might as well have Nailah absorb everything she could. And she's not around, and in part 4 she makes sure you have at least 1 unit who's capable of one-running things. There's one flaw that Nailah has. It's very tiny flaws, no to range. And so both in 1.8 especially and in part 4, sometimes an enemy will attack and they will not die. In fact, they will take 0 damage from Nailah. That's the only way they can avoid dying to her. It's kind of annoying. Rafiel can't really solve that problem all by himself in 1.8, but usually Nailah has enough turns in 1.8 to get around. In part 4, I mean, there's not many units that can 1-round in the first place, let alone at 1-2 range. There's a couple, like a very speed-invested Har could do it, and maybe a very invested Jill or Ike with the Ragnell can definitely do it. But there's not that many of them, so I don't think it's a very big flaw, like that the other units probably wouldn't even 1-round it in range in the first place. But if it happens, usually it's only like 1 or 2 enemies per group. So what you can do is like have Nailah kill everything at 1 range, and then on player phase she kills the 1-2 range units. If there's a group with like just 2 range enemies, like there's like a group of archers somewhere, just throw a different unit at them. There's probably someone who can 1-round at 2 range and just send her elsewhere. There's always going to be a group of enemies that Nailah can obliterate somewhere in part 4. Like, if you're going to try to convince me that there's not a group in part 4 left for you to kill with Nailah, I don't know what you're doing. Everyone always complains about too many enemies in part 4, so it's always something for her to do.
So many.
Yeah, there's so many. She's not the best endgame royal, but you also can't convince me that Nailah is a bad pick for endgame. She's probably not top 10 for every player because there are like 4 other royals and then a bunch of other people that might be so invested that they can actually do work at 2 range or have some kind of utility, but you can't look at a combat with Nailah and say, well, this is not good enough for me. It's impossible. She's insanely powerful, and I love using her every time. She's also just got a cool design. So yeah, Nailah good.
Oh yeah, super neat. I always enjoy kind of like watching new time players to Radiant Dawn like use Nailah for the first time, and like see her combat, and they're like, oh okay, I can't just keep doing this, right? Like eventually this doesn't.
This is gonna bite me, right?
Eventually this stops working, right? And I'm like, nah, nah, you can just keep doing it as much as you want. It's kind of funny you mentioned like how many kills she gets. I think it maybe I've had more runs with Nailah as top 1 than I think like any other unit. To be honest with you, like she just gets so many kills in part 4 in particular.
Spoken like someone who plays 0% growth.
Oh yeah, well, now that I play my teams better, Har gets more kills now. I think Har is usually top 1, but yeah, no, Nailah's insane. She's just super cool. I do want to briefly mention Glare.
Oh yeah.
Because she does have this skill. To be honest with you, I think there's no utility for this skill outside of like training people up in funny ways.
No, it's too inaccurate to do anything else. Like,
yeah,
just another command that stops enemies from doing anything.
Yeah, just well put. Yeah, I didn't even think about it, but like that. But
it's
yeah,
usually at the top.
It's usually at the top. Glare is sometimes like it's above. Oh, it's above shift though. That's what's annoying, isn't it? So you gotta press down there. If I could remove it, I would just totally get it out of here.
Okay, that's it.
That's it. That's all I gotta say. She's incredible.
Okay, we have one unit left that is might sometimes not even be considered a unit. That's the Black Knight. A long time ago, I did a tier list review for FE10 with Dawn, and I think we put the Black Knight around the same spot as Torneo because they have so many similarities. It's not just that they're both in armor with massive bulk, but they're also just units around for a very tiny portion of maps where they're obviously far away the most powerful unit you have, and are limited only by availability and a little bit of mobility. Like you said, Tauroneo has the best movement in a map that he's in Part 3, 312, and the Black Knight similarly has... I think he's roughly tied for best mobility in 1.9, I guess, so it doesn't even count for that much.
You can say it.
Yeah. Everything I've had to say about the Black Knight is just basically look at 1.9. That's the Black Knight in a nutshell. He can find items apparently. I learned that this playthrough. He can do that.
There you go.
He can find the Olivia Grass faster than Mekkah can. He can kill enemies up on ledges, despite the fact that they give him minus 50 hit penalty, which is stupid, but I love it, so I'll use it anyway. He barely doesn't kill Jarrett, and then he kills him next hit anyway, or uses Eclipse to one-hit KO him. He is invincible once your range kills everything. Make sure he gets to places, and you will not regret it. He's awesome. He is also the reason that 3-6, I think, doesn't really warrant worrying about too much, because if all else fails in Dawn Brigade, if all your units that can die are dead, and you have nothing except Savior, like the Savior skill from Fiona, as long as you have that and a couple of like Vulns or concoctions, you can win 3-6 by having Soth grab Mekkah, put him at like a choke point somewhere where he can only get attacked by one of the goos, give him a bunch of Vulns, and then wait until the Black Knight shows up and then the Black Knight clears the map. That's how you solve 3-6. Now, I'm not going to tell you this strategy will win 3-12 or 3-13. That's your problem from there. But you can beat 3-6 at the very least by doing that.
Yeah, you have Tornado for those maps, so...
Yeah, I guess you do have Tornado. Tornado looks like... Tornado makes frickin' Nolan look like Fiona, basically, in comparison. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, it's... I think there's like that one guy in the comment section who's like, well, I don't really get all the Black Knight hype. It's like, I don't know, I guess like you had a really RNG blast Mekkah on easy mode, maybe? Like, it's hard to say. I think it's impossible for like anyone else playing any other difficulties to like leave 1.9 with some misconceptions about how the Black Knight operates, right? Like, it's pretty evident. He gets into a combat and whoever he fights just dies. So should you be deploying him in 1E? I guess that's the question, because that's like the optional usage of him.
Yes.
Should you be deploying him in 1E?
Why is this a question?
Yeah, I say yes. I mean, there's some people who like want to train people in 1E, right? Like, is this better than training somebody?
I suppose. Just give more XP to
like,
one different unit, right? Like, you bench Fiona for one map.
Just, you're still getting the XP at the end of the day, right? And then, like, Like, 1E is still a pretty tricky map, right? Like, you're still going to need to kill enemies, and then there's going to be reinforcements coming in from this direction and from that direction.
Yeah,
and there's going to be thieves.
It's that, and that's another. I forgot to bring this up earlier with like Muarim, Nailah, etc. Is like, sure, you can get more combat experience by maybe trying to feed people more and slowing down, but you can get more bonus experience by going faster, and that can be used in different ways that empower your weak units even more. So it's even in that sense, it's a trade-off rather than a straight win.
And even then, so even if you do just want to go into 1E and just maximize the EXP you get on your Fiona, let's say, it's still probably wise to deploy one of Black Knight or Nailah or Muarim just so that you can torpedo the thieves and then no longer have anything to worry about, right? Just done. You know, next drop. Now it's Fiona's time to shine.
Yes.
If you really want it to be. Like, they're still worth deploying in that case. So, like, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to get out quick or whether you're trying to sit around and train. Like, having these really strong units around to just deal with the problems that you need to deal with so that you're free to worry about training is still valuable. I think you should still do it.
Yeah, it takes away the urgency and makes it get the map to a bait and switch map faster if you want it to be.
That's right. You there's a couple other funny things you can do with Black Knight. You can give him a lance, like we did.
Yeah.
If you want to be funny. There's only one other funny thing you can do is you can give him an arm scroll to bring him to double S lances. If you want.
He definitely needs the Wishblade at some point.
I know.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of like weird things you can do with the Black Knight in that sense. I like the giving the Steel Lance is legit actually about as good. Like the Bronze Lance is slightly better. There's like some things you can do in part 3 if you do this kind of equipment. That's why I'm doing it personally. It has advantages, but they're very, very slim. Don't worry about them too much.
They're very funny.
I will say if you want to unlock the whole game's story, characters, etc., and you're playing on a new game plus file, like you've beaten the game once, you're playing on the same file, you do want to deploy the Black Knight to 1E, no matter your convictions about Fiona and Edward, because it will unlock an extra character for you if you fulfill those requirements. But if you know about them, like if you don't know those requirements, you don't want to look them up, then I guess don't bother, because it still requires another couple steps. But if you know about them, this is one of the steps. Don't forget it.
Yes, you should do it.
All right. I think that covers the whole Dawn Brigade. So, yeah, we went over all the basically the training ones last time, and now we went over the more pre-promoted ones with some funny ones in here. In a very easy, and I think some people beat Radiant Dawn in the amount of time it took us to discuss the just part 1 units, but that's even
probably we have like Kirby Master speedrun in the corner, right?
Yeah, I should do that. Kirby Master beat Radiant Dawn before we finish talking about the Dawn Brigade.
Yeah,
I should consider that.
There's a quick title.
Yeah, it was fun to have actually like a back and forth dialogue about this in a little bit more of a casual setting, because we're not really worried about like where we're positioning units on a tier list like a tier list review. We're just talking about units and like a very specific playthroughs experience as well, to like think back on and think ahead on. So this was yeah, I enjoyed doing this. That's the one I wanted to say. So
I enjoyed this way to do it too. Just do them in a big heap.
Yeah, it's nice. So, with your permission, I will continue to use this format, but I know my comment section has been clamoring for unit analysis in some way, some form, so maybe next playthrough I'll reincorporate them. I think if we get to engage, for example, we can definitely talk about the units as we see them, rather than in hindsight. Maybe we could do a bit of both. We'll see how we go about this, but I do enjoy this format a little bit too. So
I really do enjoy it.
Nice. All right, with that said, I'm going to try and beat Kirby Master before he beats the final boss. So thank you for watching, and thank you, Raisins, for joining me as always.
It's a pleasure to be on, and thank you for watching.
Later.
Later.